Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from. Welcome to Prairie Conservation Action Plan's Prairie's Got the Goods Week. My name is Caitlin Rose, and I am the Stewardship Coordinator with Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or PCAP. Today, Chris Elder with ALUS Canada will be talking about Stewardship is a team sport, ALUS partnerships in the County of Vermilion River. This week, we have a series of webinars going on about ecological goods and services provided by Native Prairie. On Thursday, March 22nd, that's tomorrow, Karen Raven with Alberta Agriculture and Forestry will be talking about a multi-stakeholder GIS-based approach to support land use decision-making. On Friday, March 23rd, Kelly Williamson with SODCAP will be talking about multi-species results-based conservation. Just check out the PCAP website to register for these webinars or for more information about specific presentations. Just click on the Upcoming Events tab. I would like to take a moment to note that financial support for today's webinar is provided by Environment and Climate Change Canada, Wildlife Habitat Canada, and Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association. A reminder to all of our listeners out there, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type it into the questions section of the webinar dashboard at any time during the presentation. Questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. Now, a bit about our presenter. Chris Elder is the ALUS Program Coordinator for the County of Vermilion River. Chris has a Conservation and Restoration Ecology Diploma and a Bachelor of Science Applied Science degree in Environmental Management from Lakeland College. He started with ALUS in 2015 when he took on the Program Coordinator role to fulfill his Lakeland College practicum requirement. Chris provides technical and financial support to local agricultural producers to develop, implement, and manage environmental stewardship projects on their land. Chris is also a director with the Vermilion River Watershed Alliance and has played an active role in developing projects across the watershed. Chris is based in Kitscoty, Alberta. So Chris, if you can hear us there, you're welcome to go ahead.
All right, thank you, Caitlin, for that introduction. And here we are. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to all of you out there who took the time today to hear about ALUS in the County of Vermilion River. So today I'm going to give an overview of ALUS. I'll talk about some of the key partnerships ALUS has in the county, and I'll finish up with some examples of projects related to Native Prairie that we've been part of over the years. So it would be hard for me to give a presentation with a sports reference in the title without using a sports analogy, so that's where I'm going to begin. In the recent Winter Olympics, there were many examples of individual accomplishments. In the heat of competition, the figure skater, luger, snowboarder, or speed skater is out there battling the elements, the pressure, and the pain all on their own, often without other competitors on the course. All the hard work and sacrifice comes down to this moment, and everything is on the shoulders of one person against the world. But even the most accomplished athlete has not reached this point alone or in isolation. They are supported in myriad ways by coaches, doctors, nutritionists, family, friends, and a nation of fans back home. Beyond their talent, strength, and desire to win, a good portion of the Olympic athlete's success is due to the investment and support of those behind them. On the other side of the spectrum, and far from Olympic glory, is my 5-year-old son's soccer team. More often resembling a swarm of flies than a well-oiled machine, games at this level mean more falls and cries than precision passes. Every once in a while, a lone attacker breaks from the pack and is off down the field to score on a goalie that has dozed off or found a butterfly to follow. On occasion, that blur of athleticism comes from my son, and while we are proud of his accomplishment and happy to praise him for his effort, It also provides the opportunity to reinforce to him that soccer is a team sport, and as he gets older, it will be crucial to play with his teammates rather than leaving them in the dust. In soccer, each player has a position and a specific role that supports the overall function of the team. Everyone has to be in sync and work together, or the team will not be successful. One player cannot do everything on the field, and one player cannot win the game alone. So it's easy to see the parallels of sport to environmental stewardship. Like the Olympic athlete, the farmer is the central figure in the story, hardworking and dedicated to the land. Alongside the farmer is the supporting cast of many who desire to see a change on the landscape. These include conservation groups, government agencies, and funding organizations. Like the soccer team, successful stewardship requires that everyone works together and no one does everything alone. While the ALUS program is an effective mechanism for delivering solutions, it is only one member of the larger team and depends on meaningful partnerships to make a difference. So what is ALUS? It was originally stood for Alternative Land Use Services, and now ALUS Canada is a natural not-for-profit organization that supports farmers and ranchers to produce valuable ecological services on Canadian farmland. So ALUS is active in 6 provinces, with PEI being somewhat unique in that it's a provincial-based program. ALUS delivers ecological services, and these include things such as clean air, clean water, flood mitigation, climate adaptation, carbon sequestration, and wildlife, native bee and pollinator habitat, among many others. The list is fairly extensive, as you probably well know. And so we work in many different project types, from wetland restoration and enhancement, eco buffers, shelter belts, riparian buffers, pollinator habitat, riparian fencing, alternative watering systems, nest tunnels, and other ecologically beneficial projects that landowners may bring to us. And ALUS is somewhat unique in that it provides annual payments to ensure the ongoing stewardship of each of the projects that gets implemented. So ALUS is community developed and farmer delivered and sustains agriculture, wildlife, and natural spaces for all Canadians, 1 acre at a time. And ALUS Canada's mission is to enable Canadians to provide direct support to a national network of farmers and ranchers delivering ecosystem services in their communities, including clean air, clean water, carbon sequestration, erosion control, flood mitigation, pollinator support, and wildlife habitat. ALUS is based on 8 core principles. ALUS is farmer delivered. As the largest single group of landowners in Canada, agricultural producers are in a unique position to provide important solutions to some of the most pressing conservation challenges of our time, including climate change and biodiversity loss. ALUS is community developed. The ALUS program is flexible, designed to be customized by local communities to respect local agricultural and environmental priorities. Each ALUS program is managed by a local coordinator and partnership advisory committee, which determines how the local ALUS program will be run within the tried, tested, and true framework of ALUS Canada's principles, guidelines, and materials. ALUS is integrated. The delivery of the ALUS program is intended to complement existing conservation programs, including federal and provincial government policy frameworks. ALUS programs across the country have developed many community partnerships with conservation organizations, agricultural groups, and different levels of government. ALUS is targeted. The program focuses on marginal and ecologically sensitive parcels of land that can be managed in a different manner to produce ecosystem services that benefit all Canadians. ALUS is accountable. ALUS projects are independently verified and audited. ALUS is science-based. Based on sound scientific principles and verification guidelines, ALUS provides valuable support and technical expertise for the design and implementation of each green infrastructure project. ALUS is voluntary. Farmers and ranchers who choose to participate in the ALUS program have flexible agreements that suit their particular operation. And finally, ALUS is market-driven. The ecosystem services produced by ALUS projects have economic value on the marketplace, one that ALUS Canada is actively developing. Through ALUS Canada, citizens, corporations, and philanthropists can invest directly in Canadian environmental stewardship, 1 acre at a time. So that's kind of the broad scope of ALUS, and we'll move down a little bit into ALUS in Alberta. We have 11 communities that run 10 programs in Alberta. It started with the County of Vermilion River, where I work, in 2010. And we added Parkland and Red Deer in 2012 and 13. In 2015, Mountain View and Lac St. Anne County came on, and there's a joint program between Leduc County and neighboring Wetaskiwin. And we added Flagstaff and Brazeau and Northern Sunrise in 2016, and last year Lacombe County came on board. So we have we've had good growth in the last few years, and we're expecting 2 to 3 communities to join in 2018. ALUS in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, there are 3 programs in the 2 provinces, and they work through contrasting to Alberta that works through the municipal structure, the municipalities. Saskatchewan and Manitoba work with conservation or watershed groups. So we have Little Saskatchewan River in the Little Saskatchewan River watershed, or sorry, conservation district in Manitoba. It's just north of Brandon. And then the ALUS Saskatchewan Assiniboine project and the Wascana Upper Capel watersheds have projects as well that they deliver ALUS through. So that's kind of, the spread of ALUS in the prairies to this point. So now I'm going to take a few minutes to look at this, or go through this graphic and break down some of the processes that ALUS goes through from initial contact to establishment, and then finally payment. So the process starts with outreach, and we found that really effective ways to bring in new projects is by getting out into the community and providing extension and education activities. So in past years, and in 2017, we did a project tour that was open to the public. We've done workshops in areas like tree planting and pollinators, wetlands, and beaver management. We have attended numerous trade shows in the area to increase our profile in the county and surrounding area, and we have a web, social media, and newsletter presence through the County of Vermilion River sources. The second way to outreach is through one-on-one conversation, and we find this is probably the most effective way to attract new producers, and that's either through conversations that I have with people as I'm out and about in the county or at other events, and the farmer-to-farmer, peer-to-peer contact has been very effective too in participants that are in the program talking to their neighbors, and talking to other farmers. The third way that we can reach out is through priority areas or priority strategy. This hasn't been as heavily utilized in the County of Vermilion River as some of the other programs in Alberta, but it's certainly an option to look at. And whether those are geographic priorities based on distribution of projects or particular areas of concern or sensitive areas, in the county. We can look at it that way, or based on targeted project types that we want to increase, such as tree planting or wetland projects. So once we've engaged with the landowner and have someone interested, the next step is to do a site visit. This involves often sitting down at the kitchen table and discussing the project, and talking about the producer's vision for the project or their potential areas of improvement. We look at air photos and sketch things out on there, and then we go out to the project site and see it on the ground. Once I have all that information, I take that back and plot some polygons in GIS, and make some maps, and then prepare a proposal with kind of all of that information from the producer. And that gets presented to the Partnership Advisory Committee, which I'll talk about a little later in more detail. But this group reviews the project and gives feedback to those. And then sometimes there's some back and forth, but eventually we get to the point where they've given final approval. Most often it's when they're presented. So they're the driving force behind the project. Once we have an approval, we can get a contract in place. Typically, these are 5-year agreements that are voluntary. There's no caveats or easements or anything on title, and so it's very easy for the producer to later, if something changes, to amend that agreement, or if the need arises to get out of the agreement, that we do have the ability to do that. Often we can work out an alternative arrangement, I guess. So then we establish the project. At that point, often we have that the producers themselves do a lot of the work, but we can also contract those things out as well, depending on available funding. And ALUS does fund 50% of the project costs, so we share that with the producer and give them some financial help in putting a project in. So the next step after it's established is to monitor the project. So all of our new projects are assessed for baseline condition within the first year of establishment. And this can take a variety of forms depending on the project or the resources available. We may do a riparian health assessment on a wetland or a stream bank project, range health assessments on upland or contributing upland areas. And where those aren't necessarily possible due to resources, we at least get a baseline of photo points and a report card that we look at kind of basic health of the project and some problem areas and sort of the initial condition of that project. So we have something to go back to later. But where we can, we try to do as much initial assessment as we can. So then, after that point, projects are monitored regularly for general health and overall success. If there's any changes to that project, then we can monitor those. Up to this point, we have monitored all of the projects every year, but we've gotten to a point now where we've grown enough that we don't have projects or we don't have the resources to get to every project every year. So we're in the midst of working out a system for a staggered monitoring where once we've got a project well established, we may only go back every 3 to 5 years to take a look at that project. And we also had opportunity for several projects to be assessed by Cows and Fish, doing full inventories, and that was from 2010 to 2013. And we're working on trying to get some funds for revisiting those sites and comparing the data to the baseline that we established. So that's kind of our monitoring program. So the final step in the process is the annual payments and verification. So we pay an annual payment for the establishment of the new ecological services as well as the management, and a lot of the payment is actually geared towards the management of those new ecological services going forward. The rates are based on roughly on land rental rates, and while these are rates for the County of Vermilion River, they're fairly consistent with other communities in Alberta as well. So we're somewhere around $30 an acre in pasture, and if we do a project in cropland or related to wetlands, then it's $50 an acre. And those are the annual payments per acre for that 5-year period. And then 10% of our projects are verified each year by a third-party consultant. So we pull a random selection of projects, and then there's a desktop GIS-based exercise that the consultant does to verify the acres of each project and confirm the project types. So here's a little snapshot of ALUS in Vermilion River, some statistics on where we're at as of the end of 2017. So right now we're at 34 participants, and we have 41 agreements with those participants. So that means that we're bringing in new participants every year, but we're also having existing participants that have projects find new projects to add, and so we're adding new agreements with these projects. We have 586 projects in the county. That's always kind of misleading. That's based basically on the number of polygons and line features that we have. It's more of a GIS count than anything. It's maybe a little more accurate to look at the number of project sites. We have 66 project sites, and even within that we have several projects, in some cases per site. For example, when we have a wetland enhancement project, the fence will be a project, the watering system will be a project, the riparian buffer will be a project, and the wetland itself will be a project. So one site may have 4 or 5 projects on it. And at the moment we are at just over 3,000 acres in the county cumulative. You can see by the map there that we're fairly well distributed around the county, and we're starting to get some nice clusters of projects together too. So that helps with maybe our ecological impact a little bit by having projects connected and close together. All right, so we've looked at kind of ALUS in an overview, and now I want to spend some time talking about the partnerships that we have in the County of Vermilion River. They're broken, and I've broken them into the 5 categories. We have funding support, project partners, the Partnership Advisory Committee, producers, and then we have a fairly unique relationship with Lakeland College and their partnership with the program. So we'll start with funding support. The base funding for administration and communications and all of those things that it take to run the program, including staff wages, come from the County of Vermilion River. So that's a good base support for that administration. And then all of our project funding comes from outside sources. So ALUS Canada gets large grants or contributions from philanthropic organizations such as the W. Garfield Weston Foundation, and last year Alberta got money from the David Bissett Action Fund. So they take those, as well as potentially federal grants like the NCP or Wildlife Habitat Canada, and distribute those amongst the communities. We've also historically had lots of financial support from Delta Waterfowl. They're one of the founding organizations to ALUS, and so we've had lots of financial support from them. And we also have the opportunity to gain financial support from the new acre project that ALUS has recently launched as a way for philanthropic organizations or large corporations to contribute funding to buying acres that will get distributed across the country to the various ALUS programs. We also have the opportunity as individual programs to apply for local grants at the federal, provincial, or municipal or local level, I guess, to do project work as well. So there's lots of funding support available. Beyond the funding aspect, and some of these project partners do provide some funding opportunities as well. We have on the ground partners that provide a lot of the technical resources, technical contribution to projects, or those resources to producers. And really, ALUS is sort of a good initial point of contact for a landowner that can come to me with a project, and then I have the ability to maximize the benefit either from technical contribution or funding contribution, and really kind of maximize the resources with all of these sort of partners that we have. A good example of that is the Vermilion River Watershed Alliance, where we've done several projects in the last couple of years with them in Vermilion and across the watershed. And they've helped to provide some of the technical assistance as well as the funding assistance. All right, the next level is the Partnership Advisory Committee, or the PAC. And this is really sort of the command center of the program. This group makes all of the local program decisions, from strategic planning to communications and project types. They review all of the projects and approve all of the projects, as I said earlier, and they are a great support to the program locally by helping out with and attending local events that we do and advocating for the program in the county. So it's made up of 11 voting members, which are municipal councillors, Cows and Fish, Alberta Environment and Parks. We have an industry rep from CNRL, and we've just recently added a student from the Lakeland College student managed farm. And then kind of the backbone of the whole thing is the producers. So we have 5 local producers that balance the technical aspect with the local knowledge. Beyond that, we have 4 non-voting advisors that sit on the committee. And that includes the Director of Agriculture and Environment from Vermilion River, the Sustainable Agriculture Coordinator, the ALUS Canada agrologist that works out of Alberta, and myself, the ALUS coordinator. So really the success of the ALUS program comes down to the local producers. They're the dedicated stewards of the land. They're committed to the ALUS program, and they're eager to participate in events that we hold. In fact, all of the 5 producers here were all part of our last tour and hosted tour groups to come to their projects and hear their story. So we have so it's without this dedication of the local farmers and ranchers, there really wouldn't be an ALUS program to speak of, with all of the other structure and funding that we have. If we don't have these producers, we don't really have a program. And this is a quote we often use in ALUS: "The conservation will ultimately boil down to rewarding the private landowner who conserves the public interest." So everything revolves around these local producers who are not just thinking of themselves and their operation, but also of the benefits to the environment and the community around them. So we really owe it all all to them. They're our primary partner in a lot of ways. So lastly, we have a unique relationship, a unique partnership with Lakeland College. They started with ALUS in 2010, converting a piece of cropland into a native seeding project, and have since added 2 new agreements in 2015 and 2017 that were focused on around wetland enhancements in pasture, and that's mostly tame pasture. So this relationship is particularly exciting to me because I am a recent Lakeland grad, and really would have loved the opportunities to be involved in a program outside of the school. And so we've worked pretty hard with the PAC and with the school to develop a new relationship that shifted from the environmental side and applied research, where those original agreements were, to putting the agreements in place with the student managed farm. So that's a group of students in the agricultural college that make the plans for the farm and really run the farm. And so they're a registered farming operation, and so it gives us the opportunity to work closely with those students, as well as the new student environmental consulting office, or SECO, that was just launched in the environmental science program 2 years ago. And so they kind of work from the consulting side in suggesting agricultural BMPs or restoration techniques that could be applied to projects. And there's a link there if you're interested in finding out more about the SECO office, that links to the Lakeland College website, and there's a story about how that kind of works there. So this gives us an opportunity, with these student groups working closely together, to develop new projects, and ALUS really having the opportunity to support project design and implementation of projects, and working directly with the students. So the idea long range is to have a demonstration site in the future that we can demonstrate agricultural BMPs and restoration or enhancement techniques that can be shared with the community at large and farmers in the area, that have really been driven by students. That'll be the next generation of farmers and environmental scientists. So that's a really unique and interesting opportunity. All right, so we've looked at sort of ALUS in general and some of the partnerships that we have, and now I wanted to take a few minutes to go through some of the projects that we have on the ground that have benefited from these partnerships in the past and ongoing. They've all of those groups have in some way touched these projects, and we have quite a variety of projects, and so I figured that given that this webinar is about native prairie, I'd kind of focus this part more on what we've done involving native prairie projects. So we have 3 kind of categories: establishment, enhancement, and conservation. Okay, so we'll begin with establishment. So we know that native prairie provides a lot of ecological services, and this list is by no means exhaustive, but some of the more important ones, or ones that landowners tend to key on, are increased biodiversity, wildlife and pollinator habitat, carbon sequestration, and the ability of prairies to buffer wetlands and streams, which then improves water quality, increases water storage, and helps with erosion control. So some of the challenges we have with prairie establishment are often these are done in crop context, and so accessibility is an issue for establishing the project, but also for maintenance of the project. Sometimes getting into these areas is a little challenging. Certainly establishment of native grasses and native species is a bit of a longer term effort and can bring challenges to getting the grasses established. And then of course we have invasive species control, and how do we work with the producer to keep invasive species managed as that project is establishing. So here's an example of how we work in what we call marginal or marginal land or difficult land. This is in a crop context, where project number 2 on the map on the left is a small area that was formerly cropped. It was hard to get into. It was hard to move equipment around, and it's only 3 acres or so, and so it was really hard, or it really wasn't worth the effort of getting into it, and so they wanted an alternative to having crop in there. And it is an important area because there's those 2 wetlands on either side of it that it helps to buffer there. So the producer planted native grasses and a native wildflower mix as well to have this area as habitat for pollinators was kind of their focus. But it does many other things. It prevents soil erosion and spray drift into those wetland areas, and it holds the soil and provides habitat for wildlife as well as pollinators. So it's a small piece, and it's a tough piece to get into. That's where that accessibility comes in, but it's performing an important function. So similarly, we had another project with a grain farmer in a crop context, where they had a setback between the shelter belts, which are the green areas, and the ditch. And in past years, they had attempted with varied success, most often not much success, to crop those strips, and they were just finding that they weren't getting the value out of the land, and there were problem areas, low spots, wet spots, like the cattails in the bottom picture there. You can see that were certainly a problem there. So they planted a native seed mix of grasses and wildflowers, again for those same things, to hold the soil, to have perennial cover there, and to be habitat for pollinators particularly, but wildlife in general. It can be a corridor for wildlife and an opportunity to buffer some of these wet areas that would otherwise be problematic. So here's a third establishment project, again in a crop context, where we have on the right side of the air photo, number 1 there is the area that was formerly in crop. It was cropped very close to the edge of the wetland that had some dynamic margin there. So some of that inside margin could be wet in certain years, but there was concerns from the landowner with again, spray drift or runoff from herbicides in the crop, as well as erosion and sedimentation into the wetland from that field. And so we took a few acres out and planted it to native grasses. At this point, we did just grasses, so that if weed management was an issue later on, or during establishment, then there would be the opportunity to spray if we needed to. And so this, again, fulfills those other functions of erosion control and perennial cover, while also providing habitat and corridors there as well. And the last establishment project is going back to Lakeland College, and that project that I was talking about earlier. They had this spot that was a little bit difficult to work with. It was small, and there was a treed area and some wetlands, and so they converted it from annual crop into a native pasture. It's had some challenges with establishment, particularly with weed control. So there's been several mowing treatments and a bit of grazing and even some spraying for some spot spraying for some really troublesome areas. But again, this is providing all of those services that we've talked about all the way through, and buffering the wetlands that are in there, as well as giving the students in both environment and agriculture an opportunity to try some techniques out. There have been a few seeding trials, interseeding trials into the native grass, and just it's been some good opportunity for students to try out some techniques and some things, and we'll continue to do that going forward. All right, so the next project type that we deal with in prairies is essentially prairie enhancement. So these are most commonly projects where we have a wetland or a creek in a livestock operation where they want to get the animals out, or they've caused some damage, and they want some natural recovery there. And so these prairie pieces are areas adjacent to upland areas adjacent to those water bodies that have been fenced out as well. We've widened the buffer zone to include some of those, and so they also receive the benefit of the relief from grazing there. So again, the ecological services are very similar. And the challenges are a bit different in that we have livestock management to deal with. We've often talked to producers about, with these wider buffer areas that we've allowed, we can now use these as riparian pastures, and so we have to work out, the grazing management strategy for using those later in the season or in less sensitive times of the year. We can, in some cases, have slumping and unstable banks, and so we have to look at what potential techniques or options we might have to deal with those problems. And of course, there's always, in any project, there's always invasive species control to deal with. All right, so this is a project where we fenced out not just the stream bank, but a large portion of we actually fenced on top of the hill here to get some relief for the valley. It was too hard to go down into the bottom, so they fenced on the top. So this native prairie hillside was included as now an enhanced prairie feature. So you can see that in the top picture in 2013, this at this point wasn't particularly heavily grazed, but there has been lots of grazing on the hillside and some exposed soil and less opportunity for the native species to grow there. And then in fencing it out, you can see, although it's late in the season, it was probably in October when this picture was taken, and it's from the other side, but the vegetation communities have started to return in the native hillside, and lower down we see even more biodiversity that's happening. So the prairie is able to hold the soil better, and we have more biodiversity and better habitat there. And this is the same creek from the other end of it, and you can see that we've seen in 4 years some recovery on the banks that were exposed, and this is all just natural recovery, just from excluding the cattle. And we've seen a real jump in biodiversity. The willow species are coming back. We see dogwoods and poplar starting to come in, as well as sedges and rushes and cattails along the stream that weren't evident when it was under grazing pressure. So. Oh, and I did want to mention here too that this is a unique opportunity for us in that we have this project is at the far left side of the map, that little section there, and we have 2 other landowners that have also developed projects. So we have about 1.5 miles of contiguous stream that's now been, the management has been changed, and there's some protection on the stream. And so in the future we'll be looking to do a little bit of digging into what the results of that are, what the impact is on that larger stretch, which is a pretty cool opportunity too. All right, so the last one we're looking at is Prairie Conservation. So this is a little bit unique in that when we first started the program under Delta Waterfowl, they had some funding available to do some prairie conservation. So we have a few large chunks that are full quarters or large portions of quarters that were unbroken native prairie that were under light grazing management. And so we were able to put a token amount of $2 an acre towards those, really to recognize that the producers wanted to keep these in native prairie and keep these the way they were originally, without ongoing damage to them. So some of the challenges that come with that are livestock management, of course, when we have grazing management there. Shrub encroachment is an issue in these areas because they're often combined with wooded areas. Invasive species control, of course, and the challenge going forward is to find appropriate funding for these, or to convert them into more of a grazing management kind of project rather than just a pure conservation. So here we have a project that's 2 quarters, that's the better part of 2 quarters, and all of that is unbroken native prairie that we've put into the program. And this one is a combination of the 2. So we have on the map on the left, the area number 9 is the native prairie hillside that you see in the top picture, and they've buffered that wetland with project number 10, which is a native seeding project in that buffer zone to help trap runoff and prevent that hillside from degrading at the bottom there. So we've done a kind of a combination in that one. All right, so those are kind of the prairie focused projects. We have a number of other projects that we do around the project types. Fencing of riparian areas. This is a project we did on the Vermilion River with the Vermilion River watershed. We've done watering systems, wetland enhancements, that's often fencing and watering, but we also do some tree planting or native seeding in degraded areas. We did a eco-buffer project of native flower shrubs and forbs to attract pollinators. That was kind of the primary point of this, but it'll provide lots of other services as well. We did a fencing exclusion of some old buildings, barns that have native bats and barn swallows inhabiting them, and so the farmer wanted to protect them from further cattle damage, which is kind of a unique project. And we did a row cropping project with fruiting shrubs interspersed in the rows of crop in the little kind of demonstration site there. And we've done lots of tree planting. It's a willow planting project that we did as well. So those are some other project types that we do in the county. All right, so I started with sports, so I'll end off with sports and this quote from Phil Jackson, that the strength of the team is each individual member, and the strength of each member is the team. So ALUS is a strong program, but it would not be where it is today without the essential partnerships we've developed in the County of Vermilion River and across the country. So it's about those individual members, be them farmers, funding organizations, or other partners, and bringing what their roles are to the team. But we can't do it alone. We have to combine and do it all together. So with that, I would like to thank you for taking the time today. Thanks to Caitlin and Saskatchewan PCAP, and to the sponsors of this as well. And if there are any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for the really interesting presentation. To all of our listeners out there, if you have any questions, please feel free to type it into the question section of the webinar dashboard. Just a reminder to everyone that we do have a recording of this video that will be uploaded to the PCAP YouTube channel later today or tomorrow. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the PCAP sponsors, Environment and Climate Change Canada, Wildlife Habitat Canada, and Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association. It looks like we have a few questions here. So one is by a listener named Stephen, and he'd like to know if these projects are open to public access.
Typically, they're not open to free public access. But certainly with landowner permission or by appointment, some of our landowners aren't necessarily open to that, but a lot of our landowners are and have demonstration sites that, if a person was interested in seeing them, we could definitely arrange to have, a visit to that site, and often the producer is very open to talking about what they've done and about the project. So not in a full public access sense, but definitely we do have a number of sites that we could bring people out to.
Excellent, thanks. He is also wondering what percentage of landowners in the area take part in ALUS Canada, and approximately how many acres, if you know that.
Well, I don't know what the percentage would be. I mean, I don't have the stats on hand. It's certainly of all the landowners in the County of Vermilion River. At this point, it's a small percentage. We're at 34 landowners. So we haven't captured. There's certainly a lot of landowners out there that we could still work with. Which gives us lots of opportunity to do that. But right now we're at just over 3,000 acres in the County of Vermilion River, and I think we're at about 10,000 approximately in the province of Alberta. So it's a good number, but there's still lots of opportunity there.
Excellent, thank you. One of our other listeners would like to know, how do you initially connect with producers? And if there's a landowner in the area that's interested, what should they do?
We've tried to take the approach of getting as much exposure to the program as we can through a variety of events that we hold or that other people hold. We're happy to get an information booth or some brochures out when there's other things going on that are related in the county. And so we find that it works best when we have producers that hear about us and come to us and are interested in the program. So yeah, probably there's two ways to go to the website and to learn more about ALUS, and then my information is there, and as well as here. And really, probably the best first point of contact is to contact me, and then we can talk about potential project ideas and go through that process of getting out to visit the site. I'm always happy to visit any site in the county and take a look. That's there's we never really know the possibilities until we can get out and actually see it. So that's usually the first step. Or talking to another farmer who's involved in the program is a good place to go to, and they can provide some of that information and tell their story and get people involved that way, and then get them in contact with me if people are interested. Or I guess whatever county you would be in, if there's an ALUS program in your county, then that ALUS coordinator running the program would be the point of contact there.
Excellent, thank you. One of our listeners named John from Veresco Solutions says, thanks for the presentation, Chris. He is wondering whether ALUS has looked into funding projects via ecosystem service markets, such as carbon markets or wetland banking.
There's some higher level work being done by ALUS Canada to potentially develop or contribute to those markets. From a local standpoint, I think it's pretty difficult for us to just get involved based on the scale of some of those markets, but I think it will remain to be seen as those markets really start to develop. I think there are some opportunities there, but they're probably happening at a higher level than certainly at my level. But as they come available, or as those markets develop a bit, then we'll be able to, and as ALUS Canada is involved in accessing some of those markets, maybe on an aggregate scale, then we'll be able to tap into some of those funding possibilities in the future, I hope.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you. It looks like that's all the questions that we have from our listeners right now. So thank you again, Chris, for the really great presentation. I know I really enjoyed it and I learned quite a bit. I'd also like to thank our listeners today for attending. When you leave this webinar, you'll receive a quick questionnaire, and it's just a 1-minute survey. If you don't mind filling that out, PCAP would really appreciate it. That gives us the data that we need to be able to report back to our funders and hopefully keep our webinars going into the future. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone again for attending and wish everyone a great day. And thank you again, Chris.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.